Hello, welcome to the Human Advantage. Today, Alessandro and I are joined by Sarah Henderson, founder of Purely Public Relations. What really stood out when we were preparing for this conversation is how clearly Sarah sees the gap between what organisations say they stand for and how they actually show up. So today we'll talk about what's really going on behind the scenes, siloed teams, lack of buy-in, and why communication so often breaks down, even when the strategy looks right on paper. So this is a conversation today about alignment, honesty, and what it actually takes to tell a story. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today on the Human Advantage.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
So before we dive in, something that really connects to my own work, particularly in the charity sector, is storytelling. And it's actually one of the core steps I've created for the 7+1 framework, because what Alessandro and I work together, we kept seeing was this disconnect between the story the organisation tells and the emotional connection that they create. So, given that you spend so much time helping organisations shape how they're understood, I'm kind of curious, do you recall a time where you've seen that disconnect between what an organisation says it stands for and how they actually show up?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think so. I've worked in the PR industry or comms industry for like over 20 years. So I suppose I've been around long enough to have kind of seen all sorts of things go on. And I've also been lucky enough to work in lots of different types of organisations as well. And obviously, depends what type of organisation you work at as to how they also approach this as well. So I worked in the charity sector for over 10 years. And then I went into what you would call the dark side, which is I went into more the commercial side. And it's really interesting how a commercial business works with storytelling, completely different, I think, to a charity organisation. So I would say it's always surprising as well that some of the bigger organisations that you think who are got really good setups, good processes, lots of staff and resources can actually be sometimes the most disorganised. And actually, it's the smaller ones who actually are probably beg, borrowing and stealing without obviously a criminal record, when I mean stealing, sort of resources that actually seem a bit more organised because I think they have to be. And so storytelling perhaps becomes a bit more natural because you haven't got this crazy like chain of command of getting things like signed off through, lots of different powers that be that all have a sort of an opinion on what it is that you should or shouldn't be saying. So I've definitely been in situations where I thought we were quite clear on what it was that we wanted to try and say, or what the objective was, and then it's changed multiple times through a period of a few days or a few weeks. And then when I've then been asked to then deliver it, as much as I've been sort of asked to input into it initially, it's not really been the story I've probably wanted to tell, just because of some of the things that I've sort of flagged now. So it's a challenge.
What do you think? What happens? Because often I read a piece of work that I've written, and I kind of might step away, come back to it, and I think, oh, actually, that needs a different stance. I want to change the style or the way that that's coming across. Is it that's going on, or is it something else? I mean, you talk about chain of commands and things like that. Or what happens to make it change?
I think it's sort of similar to sort of a slightly inferred in that everyone has an opinion, I find, when it comes to writing and visualizing what a story should be. It's funny, I think in my world, lots of people tend to think anyone can write and anyone can create a photo shoot or a film or something like that. In reality, I think what people have in their head to what it then becomes from a visual point of view or from a material point of view is actually two different things. Whereas I probably would never say to somebody who works in finance, "Oh, don't worry, I'll be able to do your accounts because I know numbers." Or yes, I might be able to plus add and subtract, but I definitely wouldn't be able to do a set for cows. So I think, when you have lots of cooks, it's that famous saying, lots of cooks, things get muddled and become more complicated than maybe they should be. So I think that doesn't help. I think also sometimes people get too caught up in trying to make things more complicated than they really need to be. I think actually simple wins the race. You don't need to have lots and lots of messages, because the human brain can only really hold 3 or 4 bits of information at any one time to remember, like, straight away. So if you've got like 6 or 7, key messages that you're trying to get through in a piece of written material or through a film or a piece of audio, I think people are going to forget them. So you just make it simple and minimal, I would say.
They say, Sarah, don't they, that there's a book in all of us, but I'm not sure that we should perhaps all write one. Clearly, we need an expert to be able to do that. And I guess, the likes of you, somebody's come to you to write, I don't know, a press release or a PR article or announcement or whatever, be guided by the experts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, like, I'm always learning every day. I might have worked in this industry for like over 20 years, but that's not to say I know the ins and outs of the industry that I'm working with a client on. They're obviously the expert on their industry, so I'm always willing to listen and learn and things like that. But at the same time, I'd like to think I kind of know what I think is going to resonate with the media or is going to resonate with other stakeholders that a company or charity has, because that's the other thing. I think people always think about external just being the media, but there's loads of other external stakeholders that a business or a charity should be communicating with, and so I'd like to hope that people would listen to someone like myself if we've got some good insights on what we think is going to work.
Yeah, in fact, Sarah, so we can maybe describe a PR as a shaping whole system conversation, not just the media output, as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Where do you most often see that idea breakdown inside organizations?
Yeah, well, I think so. PR and comms is one of those funny industries. It's gone through quite a period of change, I would say. So when I started in the sort of early 2000s, I think people very much were maybe a little bit suspicious of PR. It came with a bit of a slightly dark reputation at times, that it was all about spin. It was all about, hate to say it, a bit ab-fab, that kind of stuff. And actually, we've gone on this journey now where I think people have realised that, or I'd like to think that PR and comms is a bit of a necessity. Actually, you can invest in things like paid for activity, like advertising and marketing, but actually PR is one of those disciplines that actually needs to sit around the table as well. So I think a lot of challenges, barriers that I've found in my career, and it's getting better 100%, is that my team used to get missed out at key meetings, so we didn't get invited round the table, and that would range from proactive kind of planning ahead, and then also the more serious stuff, which is the reactive stuff when things go wrong. So, and we're going into what I would call issues in crisis management there, and that's such a problem, because the PR and comms team are at the coalface. We're the ones having to firefight and protect a business or a charity's reputation. And if we're not in the room getting all the facts and the instant information, or we've never been in situations or in meetings where we could have maybe prevented something happening even to start with, if we had known that maybe something was about to happen, that has probably, I would say, the biggest challenge has been that sort of forgetting to involve us, or as I sort of mentioned before, sort of silo working, where people just go off and make decisions and then they just forget to even tell the PR and comms team that they're doing this, and then we have to pick up the pieces when things go wrong.
I see that one probably from a psychological point of view. So I'm thinking about what you shared, that I see when something is intangible or invisible, it's also difficult to see the value of the thing, because many people think that communication is invisible, but communication is going to influence the way that you think and the way that people perceive you. So probably one of the reasons why people don't really put enough worth or like the value is maybe the invisibility. So you work in a field that built around clarity, around like alignment, yet many organizations still struggling or still struggle with internal buy-in. What do you think gets in the way of that alignment actually taking hold?
Yeah, I mean, that's also, I suppose, the point maybe I was slightly alluding to earlier, is that I think people view PR and comms as very much this external facing discipline, but actually it's got a really important part from an internal point of view. So again, because I've been in this industry long enough, I do internal comms as well as external comms. So the PR piece is just as important, communicating internally with your own staff or your volunteers if you're a charity, as it is to, you know, the media or to policymakers and politicians and you know, your investors and your shareholders and that sort of thing. And actually you can argue that it's always best, you need to communicate first with your staff and volunteers, and then everyone else is second. Because if your staff and your volunteers aren't bought in, and also if they're not being communicated with first, they're going to get really upset if they find out about it secondhand through another comms channel. So that's where I think the prioritization is really important, is that if you even do just the absolute minimum of what I would call PR and comms, at least get your internal comms right, and take your staff and volunteers on that journey with you, because as I'm sure you both know, in your own professional capacity, once you get them brought in, they feel motivated, their morale is up, they feel engaged, they're feeling educated, you're just going to get so much more from them. So it's really important, really.
Couldn't agree with you more on the internal communication, because I think whatever's going on internally shows up externally. So you've got to have that, you know, that's the foundations of everything, isn't it, Sarah?
Absolutely. And I've been in situations, sadly, where maybe not always through any fault of the business, because, you know, everyone goes through economic challenges, you know, and you are a bit reliant on what's also going on nationally within the UK. But I've definitely been in scenarios where the internal comms element has not necessarily aligned with the external comms element, which is an absolute disaster. And then, you know, that's got leaked, and then you're in a real pickle then. Or the internal piece has gone out and it's never really had the intention at all of being supposed to go out externally, because, you know, for example, redundancies and restructures, there's a key process you have to follow before, you know, you can make a decision, obviously, that someone is definitely going to lose their job. And, you know, when staff are disgruntled or they're not being communicated with properly, they're going to just vent to anyone that's going to listen to them. And that's been difficult, having to pick up those pieces where, you know, internally it's broken down, and then externally then we've had to try and just sort of firefight and try and, you know, stop it becoming a bigger story than it kind of needs to be. So I think that's sort of, to your point really, Karen, that's the key, isn't it?
I think, you know, you've clearly, you know, the throughout our conversation, you've talked about alignment and buying across the whole organization. And you said that, you know, often when you've been in organizations, you've been missed out around the table when those conversations you quite clearly needed. And we talked, you know, also silos. You know, when that isn't there in the work that you're doing, how does that show up in practice?
Yeah,
if you're not involved?
Well, it's really hard to draft messaging, I think. So if you take it from a issues and crisis point of view, like you have to react really quickly, because the first 24 hours is sort of like the golden hours, really, to try and get yourself on a good footing. So if you're not round the table and you're hearing things second or third hand, it's quite difficult to, one, write the messaging, two, answer the phone calls and the emails that you're getting. So whether that's from the media or whether that's from a customer services point of view, because, you know, if customers are affected, they're going to be phoning someone, and then that call centre then they're going to be phoning you to get the answers, so that again you're all aligned. So that's difficult. And then from just a general proactive point of view, how can you ever really make the best of hopefully what is you would call a positive announcement if you don't know the backstory as to how you even got there and why the company or the charity made the decision to, you know, proactively go out with that announcement. So yeah, it's I think it's really important, and you don't need a big team. When I say about investing in PR and comms, I think maybe people think you need to have this big PR agency and you've got to spend, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds, and you've got to be a FTSE business and all this kind of jazz. It doesn't have to be anything like that. You can still be really effective by having even just one person or just a freelance kind of capacity. Just having that sort of process and system set up, I think will go a long way for you.
I think communication is key, isn't it? It's having that one voice where you're all united, you're singing from the same hymn sheet, you know, whoever someone talks to, they're hearing the same message. It's when that they're hearing, diluted messages or not a clear, or there isn't clear communication, that's when people lose trust, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And trust is key. And, you know, I think now in the age of social media, so obviously when I first started my career, we didn't have the likes of Twitter or X as it's now called, or Facebook, Instagram, you know, so things didn't go viral like they do now. But, you know, there's so many cases of businesses just suddenly being caught on the hop because, you know, somebody's made a complaint about something and then suddenly, it's just gone viral. So I think more now than ever, sadly, any business or charity will go through a much more bumpy ride or a crisis than they perhaps might have ever had prior to that, because of the impact that the digital age that we all live in now has on all of us.
I'm linking to the word that Karen used, trust, that you expanded. So based on my experience, trust comes from the comparison between my actual experience and my expected experience. So expectations are really, really important, in particular when you are in business, because we usually compare and contrast. Oh, this is what I'm experiencing, and this is what I was expecting before, for example, working with you. So in the preparation to this conversation, you mentioned the need to educate and demystify expectations early.
Mm-hmm.
What usually happens when those expectations aren't challenged early enough?
Yeah, that's why it sort of goes back to the earlier point of getting the PR and comms team in right at the beginning. So if you're at that sort of planning stage, then I think that's the point where you can start managing expectations really early on. Because again, I think people sometimes, rightly or wrongly, think PR and comms are magicians. We can magic things away. I mean, I'm not that talented enough, unfortunately. I wish I was. So I can demystify that straight away. Secondly, I think people think because they're so maybe bought in with their own sort of story, they've got quite high expectations on how they think that story is going to land. But again, I'd always want to be really realistic right at the beginning and say, yes, it might be a good story, but we're going to need to tweak it here and there, or we're going to have to work out, maybe this is the right avenue for it and not the other road. So if you can get us in early enough, I can do that sort of expectation setting. And also the thing around budget as well is often an uncomfortable conversation, because sometimes, again, businesses or charities want to go really big with something, but actually if there's no budget there, and also really importantly, there's not enough time to deliver it, that's going to be two quite tricky barriers to kind of overcome. So I think that's probably where that expectation kind of piece really kind of fits at its best, is getting us in early so that we can have maybe those slightly uncomfortable conversations at the beginning, and then hopefully we're all then aligned, because if we've talked about it early enough on, hopefully we've sort of like almost done a bit of scanning to kind of go through all sorts of different scenarios and preventing anything from happening that might then not meet those expectations.
Sarah, you talk about social media, and I think that's probably an important one, because what used to be just your traditional newspaper or radio has now become, as you said, a message that goes across so many different channels, read by very different audiences. So your visibility is far greater, but you don't ever really know who your audience is. So I guess it's really important in your work to make sure that message is really clear. Yeah. So you say that you start with planning and you to manage the expectations, but when you start to see a disconnect play out, what does it actually cost? Not just reputationally, but in terms of missed opportunity or partnerships that never quite get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at that planning stage, you've got to be really clear as to kind of who are the audiences that you're trying to reach, and where is it that they consume their news from, if you're going out externally, for example. So, if you take the younger generation, there's some stats out there currently at the minute, is that they actually get their news from TikTok. They don't get their news from BBC, for example. Whereas, in another age group, probably the BBC actually rates a lot higher, because that is the age group that the BBC tends to reach more. So, you've got to do all that sort of planning and research really early on, so that, you can pivot and make sure that you're reaching the right people at the right time, and maybe just tweaking ever so slightly then the messaging, so the nuance of what you're trying to say is right, but you're obviously going to have to, maybe the way that you present the information needs to be slightly different, because the way you present something on TikTok to the way you present something on a blog article on your website is going to be really different. So to your point, I think you have to constantly research and keep up to date with the trends and stuff. I don't really enjoy doing my own personal social media for my business, but one, I have to do it because I need to understand how it works, because I can't preach to my clients to do it if I'm not doing it as well. Right. So
you've got to stay current, you've got to stay relevant. As you say, there's a lot of pivoting, isn't there? And then we've got technology changing at such a space. And what have we got recently? Now AI is playing a massive part.
Yeah.
And writing things, and Alessandro doing an awful lot of work behind the scenes talking about AI, and actually helped us make a decision about what we called our podcast, being the human advantage, because AI is an amazing tool. It can be a time saver, but actually that human engagement, that how you articulate the emotion, and absolutely what we're talking about today, Sarah, your piece of work of making sure that you articulate and get that message across, and the emotions are felt, which is something that we help the charities do, because they're really good at saying what they do, but it is translating that emotion. And you've got to be careful that you use these tools wisely.
Absolutely. I often used to say, when I worked in the charity sector, that a win for me, and it sounds really heartless, but it isn't heartless, is that if I made someone cry through watching or reading something, that was a win for me, because I knew then I'd hit them at the right place, because it would motivate them to become a supporter of the charity, either whether that was through donating money or donating their time and being a volunteer, or recommending us to somebody in their network that might want to support the charity. So you've got to hit them hard, unfortunately, in order to make yourself different to all the other really worthy charities or businesses that are out there.
I think there are different types of media. Now I'm moving to a little bit different, media. There are maybe own media, earned media, different types of media. And as both of you were discussing, sometimes it's quite difficult to understand the algorithm, because you might use Instagram, by Instagram, they might change, update the algorithm. So if you play the game of the algorithm, it's quite demanding. So one of the best ways to like grow a business, based on my experience from a marketing point of view, but also psychological point of view, are partnerships. So we can draw a clear line between partnerships built for depth and those driven by purely visibility. So in your experience, Sarah, what is that stops organization from moving beyond the visibility, even when they know it's not enough?
Yeah, I think it's sort of to your point, really, is that actually people don't see the value of collaborations, actually. And I'm definitely a collaborative person. I can't often do things on my own. I've got to work with other departments in other teams, and they've got to buy in, as we sort of mentioned before. But I think businesses can grow so much more if they collaborate with others. And, you know, and there's instances where businesses have even collaborated with their actual competitors, and it's actually kind of worked. And that's a kind of maybe controversial kind of decision to make. But actually, do you know what? If you've both got something that's going to reach a bigger audience and it's going to work better joining up, excuse me, together, then why not do that? But also, I think collaborations bring new thinking, as well as, you not only hopefully maybe more revenue or more opportunity. Isn't it better to have a few people thinking about things rather than just one person thinking about something?
Probably because they are not quick wins. It takes time, it takes effort to build like a very strong collaboration.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, it's I know it's a difficult decision for businesses to make, to collaborate, and when is the right time to do it. But I think, yeah, there's power in it, 100%.
If an organisation does want to move beyond, you know, fragmented teams, we talked about how we need to be one voice, and often there's unclear messaging, and engage in, you know, partnerships. Can you suggest one change that actually makes everything easier?
I think probably down to the sort of education and demystifying point, actually. I've done, and it's worked quite well. I've literally gone in, whether I've been working in-house already in an organisation, or I'm the external agency and going into an organisation, I've gone in and literally done like a half an hour to an hour's, like almost like going back to basics of why it's important that you do PR and comms, and why you should work with them, and what is the thing that we're trying to collectively achieve together, and how it can help then achieve your own team's objectives. So I've done that a lot with the marketing team. I think marketing teams can be quite, I don't know whether reserved about it, but can be a bit reticent about sometimes investing money in this, and you know, they've got their own paid for channels that they want to do, and blah blah blah. And I think if you just go back to the basics and say, look, actually we're both trying to achieve ultimately the same objectives here, but let's go back to the beginning and let me teach you what it is that can help. That's been quite successful, doing it that way. So maybe that's something to for, you know, businesses and charities to consider, is you know, bring in someone to sort of start from the beginning, and hopefully then that sparks some really interesting thoughts, maybe get some plans in place, start some processes, and see how it goes from there.
Yeah. What you're just talking about resonates with me, really. Part of the 7+1 framework, we talk about impact doesn't come from fixing one thing, it comes from aligning everything. And exactly what you're saying, going back to basics, why are we here, what are we doing, and getting the foundations right, then everything else follows.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah, I think it's always better to just start with a blank sheet of paper. Whenever I've onboarded a new client in the agency that I run now, is I've literally just like started that way, even though they might have sort of told me in a roundabout way what it is that we're trying to achieve. I'm like, let's just go through this again one more time. and it's been quite helpful, actually, as you know, thrown up some good stuff.
You remind me of a time that I went into a charity and I gave everybody, do you remember those sticky labels? And I got them all to write their name on. And the chief exec came up to me and said, Karen, that's very old school. But do you know what? It was so good. It was so powerful because some people in that room, they've worked together for 5 years and they didn't even know each other's names.
Wow.
They didn't know each other's names.
That's a
It
worry,
blew my
isn't it?
mind. But, you know, going back to basics, do you know what? You know, I still write notes and, you know, there's a lot to be said for, you know, the Billy basics. I love them.
Yeah, I love a flip chart still.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So probably before we come into the conclusion, what you help us to understand from this conversation, Sarah, is we expose the gap between how organizations present themselves externally and how they operate internally. So when there is a misalignment, it's where you also build, when there is a balance, you build the trust. When there is disalignment, sometimes is where people choose you or choose a competitor rather than you. And also what already also grabbed my attention is what you said in terms of expectations. So when you involve a PR at the very beginning, like in the planning conversations, you can also achieve your goals. So if this is my expectation, and I know the expectation from the very beginning is like guiding you, is it like having a structure. The reason why we created the 7+1 framework is to have a structure that allowed us to really understand what is your expectation, or where you are now, where you want to be, and what are the different tools that we can help you to achieve your goals. And from a very, very psychological point of view, you use the word friction. Sometimes what I call a positive friction, like that level of discomfort that we don't want to say something, is one of the main reasons why sometimes there is no communication between, or there is a misalignment between the external world and the internal one. So these are a few points that you clearly share with the audience and with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last point related to that is don't ever forget about the wash up afterwards. I think lots of businesses and charities, you know, they deliver, collectively a project together, and then everyone forgets about it and never really looks at it. And every time you deliver a piece of PR and comms, you should always reflect back afterwards and think, you know, what worked, what didn't work, how could we do it better? And you should definitely do that in an issues and crisis management point of view, because there'll 100% be things that you hadn't done quite right that you need to learn for next time, in case in the difficult scenario that it might happen again. So yeah, I agree with all your points, but I think, don't forget the wash up bit as well.
And I think you also mentioned something really, really important, is some people, they might think, oh, in order to have a PR or someone next to me for my public relation, I need to have a big budget. But it's not true, because in fact, with I think is a step number 4, Karen, is how can I leverage my existing resources in order to achieve the goal? So it's maybe a PR is a person also that is say, this is the tool that you already have in your organization, but you are not fully leveraging. So it's not in terms of adding extra resources, is knowing what are the resources that you already have that you're not leveraging, and they can help you to achieve your goal.
Definitely, yeah. And I think actually the organizations, actually all my clients that I work with currently, none of them have ever done PR before. So we're going on this journey together. And actually that's much more exciting, I find, sometimes when you're working with organizations that have never kind of seen the impact. And yeah, they haven't, none of them, I would say, have got huge budgets, but actually you can do some good stuff still with small budgets. So I think, let's myth bust that straight away, that you don't need to be a bitsy business to undertake PR and comms. And actually, it can work out better value than paid for advertising as well, because print advertising, for example, is really expensive now. So actually you could probably spend less and have more impact undertaking PR and comms than you would advertising, although I'm sure all the ad people watching this will kill me for saying that, so apologies in advance. I love you really. So.
Brilliant. So if someone want to contact you, like want to contact a purely public relations, maybe you are on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, what is the best ways to contact you, Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm on all those social media channels because, as I alluded to earlier, I need to be. So yeah, feel free to drop me a line on there, or my website, purelypublicrelations.com, has a contact us section. So fill in the form there and you can drop me a line, and yeah, more than happy to have a discovery call and chat about anything that anyone wants to chat about.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your time, to dedicate your time with us, share your expertise. And I hope that everyone that is going to watch, they might contact you for a new experience with a PR agent.
Lovely. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah, so much.